Welcome to a new edition of the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino. On this episode, we talk with Director of People Building, Gemma Bailey. As the Director of People Building, it is a personal and professional development company specializing in NLP training, hypnosis, and coaching. She is the creator and franchisor for NLP for Kids, a company that teaches practitioners how to help children, families, and schools with mild to moderate mental health issues. She owns a high street therapy company called the Hypnotherapy and NLP Clinic. She is an international speaker, an author, YouTuber, and a director for a nonprofit organization called Superheroes. It's a great interview. Enjoy. So good morning, or good afternoon, I guess I should say. It's great to meet you. Thank you for taking a little time out for the program. I appreciate it.
Not at all. Thank you so much for having me. It's lovely to talk to you.
Great to talk to you. And before we get into your world of, an alternate view on psychology and how you arrived here, we've gone through quite a thing on the planet for the last 3 years. It's really kind of messed with our psychology, which has been the pandemic. So I want to know from you and your standpoint, how did you survive it, and how have you subsequently changed the way that you do things now that the world's waking up?
Oh, that's a good question. So my experience of the pandemic was that I felt like I arrived a little late to the party because I didn't really know what was going on until we went into lockdown. And then I suddenly caught up on the news and realised that this thing had been bubbling away for the last couple of weeks and people had been panicking about it. And my initial response and experience to it was that I was quite worried because I had to lay off my staff and I was unable to visit a couple of relatives who were in care homes receiving end-of-life care. So there were some concerns that, I might not see those people in their final days. I was financially very concerned about what would happen with my businesses. And I was also, for about 3 months, and due to an error on Facebook's part, I was banned from Facebook for the first 3 months of the lockdown because they thought that I was under the age of 13 years old for some random reason, which makes zero sense because I was paying for advertising and you have to have a credit card to be able to do that. But because all their staff had gone home, I didn't even have digital contact with anybody. So there was no physical contact, and there was very kind of limited business operations, and I didn't have any digital world where we're normally kind of running our advertising and keeping in touch with friends and family. So I was quite worried. And then because of the nature of the work that I do, so I work in alternative mental health, and one portion of that is with children and young people with mild to moderate mental health challenges such as anxiety, phobias, and perhaps bad habits, for example. The other side of it is working with adults. So I also coach adult clients around different mental health challenges. Again, could be anxiety, low confidence, stress, depression, and the sorts of things that tend to show up for adults quite a bit. So it became clear probably about 6 weeks into the pandemic that the parents who were homeschooling their children were panicking, and their children were not necessarily doing well under those circumstances. So that side of my business began to grow quite rapidly, albeit suddenly in an online world, which was quite new. And then eventually the adult side started to really pick up as well, as the people that initially thought they were going to enjoy being at home realised that actually the walls were caving in, and they were starting to become sort of very stressed and under pressure because of that. So in a lot of ways, the pandemic made some big and useful changes in the businesses that I have, because it generated more business, but it also meant that we were starting to work in an online way because we couldn't see people face to face, and that's been quite a revolution. in that mental health services can be provided in an online format and still be just as effective, and in some cases even more effective than when you see people face to face. But there was definitely the kind of, I'm sure like everybody, the initial, and not really knowing. It was the uncertainty, not really knowing how things were going to land and where we would be by the end of it, or when the end of it would even happen. So, yeah, it was bumpy, but overall we survived.
Yeah, it is. It's weird now that we're kind of coming out, and I saw the calendar change to March and April, and that really kind of brings things into focus. It's weird. I did a lot of interviews with musicians during that time, and I've listened to a little bit of it. And I've been hearing some archive podcasts, too, from that time period. And it's weird how we have gone to a different place, a different post-pandemic place, because we really all kind of had that pallor over us where it was like, what's going to happen? We had no idea. And then it was the start-stop. Like, once we thought things were better, there was a variant, So, anyway, it's interesting how it's all played out. It's so good that we're all kind of waking up now. But I want to know from you, to get to the kind of the essence of what you do. If I put you hypothetically in front of a bunch of grade school kids at a career day, and one of them looks up at you and says, "What do you do for a living?" Let's say third graders. How would you answer them?
Yeah. So I guess the sort of simple explanation of what I do is I help people. And usually they require my help because they are thinking in an unhelpful way, or they are feeling unhelpful feelings. And very often those two things are connected. So sometimes the work I do involves helping people to notice and interrupt their thoughts, so that if they are perhaps being really unkind to themselves or telling themselves bad things about themselves, they've got ways to be able to correct that so that they can begin being a bit kinder to themselves. And the reason why that's important to do is because we tend to feel more positive, more motivated, and happier if we are nice to ourselves than when we beat ourselves up with a big stick. The emotional side, some people have emotions that they feel they're not in control of. So perhaps they're getting angry a bit too fast, or they're behaving in ways that they end up feeling guilty about later on, and then they have other reasons for disliking themselves. So some of what I do is giving them tricks and strategies and techniques so that they can begin to change how they're feeling and change how they're behaving and reacting. And all of those things help you to get better results in life. So that's not necessarily results on an academic level, but it could be. So it could be that you get better grades. But sometimes it's just about having better conversations or nicer connections with other people, or just finding that you have more space to be happy in your life, that you sleep better, that perhaps that nail-biting habit that you had starts to disappear. So there are things about yourself that begin to change in useful ways. And yeah, that's how I would describe what I do, I think.
So let's take you back to that grade in your life. What was your dream growing up? What did you want to become?
Oh, well, back in the early days, so I wanted to do fashion design. And I think that's because I've always had quite a creative and artistic streak. I didn't do it, but I think there are definitely aspects of my life that still reflect that artistic and creative streak. So going back to the pandemic, one of the good things that happened for me in the pandemic was that I completely changed my working week. So I no longer worked Monday to Friday. I work Monday to Thursday now. And that 3-day weekend gave me the time and the headspace to redecorate the house that I'd bought 8 years ago and had been living in with bare walls, which had all come about because I'd been caring for those family members who were unwell and in care homes. And the way in which I've kind of decorated and themed my house is quite eclectic and very quirky, my friends would probably say. It's very colourful in parts, it's very streamlined in parts. it's very much a sort of attention to detail kind of a place. One of my friends said it's a bit like walking into a museum, but I think it's more like a sort of museum of experience, kind of walking through it. So even though I didn't do the fashion design, there are some aspects of what I do where that still comes through, and I would say my house has been the biggest project that has reflected that. And I think the other way in which it's reflected is just in my work generally. I don't do well with doing the same thing day in and day out. So if I get bored, which happens, then I'll end up designing a project. Sometimes it might even, really come down to the nuts and bolts of what the website's going to look like, or like the social media posts that then are going to support that project. So I'll kind of, do the design phase from all possible stages and all possible angles. And it's, it can be quite a lot of work, but actually I really enjoy doing that. So it's not quite fashion design, but it's still some form of design that I do.
So you are certainly not the type that just has a job that you go to. You have something that you feel deeply passionate about, which requires you to give a lot to your clients. So let's go back in time to your childhood. Tell me about where you were born and raised and how some of these seeds were planted in you to become who you are today.
Mm-hmm. So I was born and raised in a place called Hemel Hempstead, which is in a county called Hertfordshire in England, in the UK. And in terms of what that was like, so my family were working class, and I would say kind of poor working class, and we lived on what we call here a council estate, which is kind of like supported housing, and tends to have families where people are, living off of social supports and benefits and those sorts of things. My parents actually separated when I was quite young, and one of the things that happened as a result of that was that my mum, my sister and I moved into a refuge, so a women's refuge, and we lived there, and I had to change schools, and so we were there for, in total, probably just over a year, maybe a couple of years, where we were living with other women who'd been in abusive relationships with other children who'd had abusive fathers, and I didn't see my dad for all of that time. And then eventually he was moved out of the family home and we went back into it. So it was for a while, my mum, my sister and I. My sister has severe learning difficulties and she has something called epilepsy. And again, she has very severe epilepsy. So she was taken into state care when she was around, say, 8 years old. So I was probably about 6, something like that. And then at that point, and from that point onwards, it was really my mum and me who were living in what had been our family homes. It was a 3-bedroomed house, so it was quite large for us. So it was just us two knocking about in there. And then at the weekends, my dad would have access to me. My dad had gone back to live with his parents, so my grandparents. And my dad was a big fan of drinking beer. So on Friday evening after he picked me up from school, he would take me to my grandparents' house, and then he would be in the pub getting drunk. And then on Saturday morning, I would spend that with my granddad because Dad had a hangover. And then on the Saturday afternoon, my dad would go back to the pub. He would come back for a sleep in the afternoon, and then Saturday evening, he would go back to the pub, and I would spend the evening with my grandparents. And on a Sunday, my granddad and I used to do the cleaning and polishing of the house. My dad was still asleep with his hangover, and then around lunchtime, my dad would wake up, and then he would go back to the pub. And then after he'd been to the pub, he would take me home back to my mum's house. And that was pretty much my routine growing up. Was during the week I was at home with my mum, And then at the weekends, I was staying with my grandparents, even though it was kind of classified as visiting my dad. I didn't actually see very much of my dad. So it was definitely somewhat chaotic, not just because of the dynamics of that family, and, you know, the parents separating and my sister with her learning difficulties and my dad with his alcoholism. And my mum had something called borderline personality disorder, which made her emotionally very unstable. It was also when you have those sorts of chaoses that you're growing up with, actually the people around you, their emotions tend to be quite unstable and unpredictable. So I think it was quite a volatile experience for me growing up. And yeah, never kind of coming home from school and never kind of knowing what character I was going to meet when I walked in through the front door that day. So I spent a lot of my childhood being quite anxious and, yeah, and probably feeling like I didn't really fit in anywhere that I was. And I would certainly say that all of those experiences have contributed towards me becoming a make a difference person and wanting to help other people with those anxieties, and certainly helping children with navigating the challenging life circumstances and family circumstances that they might find themselves in.
In this path that you've been down in your life, you know, you have to draw strength from good people. Who's been a hero or a role model for you?
So the granddad that I just mentioned, I think that what I drew from him, so he was quite a disciplined person in that Saturday mornings we would go out and do the shopping for the whole family. So we would go into town together, and he was very routine focused, which actually I am to some extent as well. Even though I like doing kind of different weird and quirky projects, I've always got this kind of staple thread of routine that I stick to. So we would go into town, we would have tea and breakfast at the same restaurant every single week. We would go shopping to the same supermarket every single week, and then we'd get the same bus back from our shopping trip every single week. And then on the Sunday, every week, we would do the cleaning. So he would do the hoovering, I would do the polishing, and they had a grandfather clock, like one of those big clocks, and I used to, every week I would have to wind the clock up so that the clock would keep functioning in the home for the rest of the week. And I found out, actually not that long ago, that when my grandparents had first got married, they lived in a place in London called Mill Hill, and they had wanted to move to Hemel Hempstead, but they didn't have any connections to the area. And so my granddad, in order to get themselves on a housing list to move to this area, had got a job here, and he didn't drive, so he rode his bicycle here every day, and he rode his bicycle home from work every single day, come rain, wind, snow, you know, whatever the weather. And it is probably a good 20-mile journey. And so he was, you know, traveling on his bike 40 miles every day just to make sure that his family got to live in a place that they wanted to live in. And I thought that was a really commendable action on his part, and not just a one-off one. You know, he did that for probably months, if not a year or so, to be able to get them onto the housing register. And it definitely demonstrated to me that that grit and determination that I have, that's maybe kept me working at stuff that other people might have given up on, probably comes from my granddad. So yeah, he'd definitely be up there in terms of one of the heroes and influences.
So every day you wake up, there's things that you want to do and accomplish. What motivates you on a daily basis?
I think there are probably a few things. So I like the feeling of accomplishing and achieving things. and I like the feeling of making a difference. So those definitely provide me with some fuel. I like knowing that, maybe I've helped some kind of ripple effect, a positive ripple effect to start in somebody else's life. So that makes a difference to my motivation levels. And I think, I take not just the day-to-day work that I do very seriously, but I suppose on a sort of more global scale, I take the fact that, I have 29 franchisees now, and 3 members of staff in our head office. And I feel quite a deep sense of responsibility towards all of those people. And so I'm constantly thinking about, are they doing enough? Are they getting enough? Do they feel supported enough? Is there anything more that I could be doing? So a lot of the time, I don't want the people around me to become stagnant either. And so I'll keep kind of providing that fuel and energy so that as well as moving myself forward, hopefully it either benefits or inspires them to do the same.
So of all of the things that you've accomplished in your life up to this point, what are you the proudest of? What really puts a smile on your face?
Oh, good question. What really puts a smile on my face? I think it's not really anything like that I physically, it's not like a product or something that I could give physical form to. It's more that it has been so incredibly and quite unfairly challenging at times. For me, when life went in a bad direction, it did it in every conceivable way. So I had, my mum developed this rare brain disease, and I became her power of attorney and had to sell her house. But at the same time, that meant that I became my sister's power of attorney because of all the learning difficulties. But then her care home shut down, so I had to find her a new care home. And simultaneously to that, then my businesses started to struggle because I wasn't there running them in the effective way that I should have been doing, because I was out doing the family stuff. And I had a new house, which I wasn't decorating because I was dealing with the family stuff. And then COVID happened, and it just kind of went, like everything just kind of experienced a blow in multiple areas of my life, either simultaneously or certainly sequentially. And so it felt for a while like I didn't have an opportunity to come up for air for myself. And I was doing an awful lot of output for others and still seeing clients and hopefully delivering a decent service to them as well. So I think whilst I'm not completely out the other side of that, things, like the pandemic, we said, has calmed down now. And my sister's in a nice care home now, which is good, albeit she's not in a very healthy state at this moment in time. She's at least getting good care. My mum sadly passed away, which, whilst being very, very sad, was also a merciful release from a very cruel disease that she had that was very difficult to witness her deterioration. And I got the house decorated, as I mentioned. So there's definitely been areas where I've either kind of regained some time or some freedom, or some issues have resolved themselves. And so now I'm in a place where I can kind of look back on those last few years and go, whoa, you did that. Like you got through it, and everything was okay in the end. And so I think that's probably what I'm most proud of, is that even when it was, it's most stressful, most darkest, that I still took care of the people that I had responsibilities for, and ultimately I survived. So that would be it.
So everyone that that experiences who you are in different pockets have a perception of you, whether it's clients, colleagues, family, friends, but ultimately you live your life. What is your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
I think that I'm driven. I think I'm like pretty high energy. I think that I'm fair. I'm honest. That's a very important trait for me. I think that I am somewhat meticulous, not a perfectionist, but detailed about things. I think that I get distracted sometimes, which is not such a good thing. And sometimes, my focus could be better or better placed, let's say. Overall, I would say that I'm a trustworthy, decent, loyal person.
So, Gemma, if anyone out there wants to know more about you, hire you, anything related to your world on the web, where can they go to get that?
So there's a couple of places you can go to. So for those who are interested in the mental health and well-being of children and young people, maybe because you have one that's in need of some help in that area, or because you're interested in becoming a practitioner who could work in that area, because all of our training is delivered online and it's accredited. So for the stuff relating to children and young people, I would encourage you to go to nlp4kids.org. So that's N for November, L for Lima, P for Papa, and then a numerical 4, and then kids, kids.org. And on that website, there's both the support for parents and professionals who are working with young people or concerned about a young person. And there's also our accredited training, and there's details about the franchise opportunity and actually becoming a practitioner, which means that you get to utilise our branding, and you also get looked after by myself and all of the rest of the NLP for Kids team. If you're someone who is interested in the grown-up side of things, so the adult coaching or the support services that are available for adults, then the website to go to is peoplebuilding.co.uk. And so there are details around finding a practitioner to support you if you are in need of some mental or health or well-being support for yourself, or if you're interested in becoming a coach who works with adults around these sorts of challenges. Again, all of that training is accredited and it takes place online, so you can be anywhere in the world. And we have a home study element to the training, and then we have a live portion where you actually come on to a Zoom session, go into breakout groups, and you get to practice putting all of the techniques into action with me overseeing it as your trainer before accrediting you as an NLP practitioner. Or a hypnotherapist. We offer that training as well. So the place to go to for that one is peoplebuilding.co.uk. Both of those organisations that I've mentioned, so both NLP for Kids and People Building, have their retrospective YouTube channels, and People Building also hosts a podcast as well, which is called Extraordinary People, and that's where I get to have very insightful and sometimes very intense conversations with people that have been through extraordinary life experiences and have not just survived but thrived on the other side of them. And so it's a little bit of an exploration into what it is about their psychology that made them able to cope with those challenges or to make certain changes in their life so that they were taking more control over their circumstances. So the People Building podcast is available on all the major podcasting platforms, and the video version of that is also on YouTube.
Wonderful, Gemma Bailey. This has been a great story of overcoming, and it's been a wonderful story. Thank you for laying everything out. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for your time. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
Thanks for tuning into another famous interview with Joe Dimino, where we cover the world of art, literature, business, spirituality, music, and more from around the globe. If you want to hear more interviews, visit Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino on YouTube. You can find us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Thanks again for listening, and until next time.